The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Bagshot Park, casting long shadows across the breakfast room where 15-year-old James sat with his bowl of cereal, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. He scrolled through his phone, checking messages from school friends who were planning their weekend activities, when his mother, Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, walked into the room with an unusual expression on her face. James looked up from his phone, noticing the formal envelope in his mother's hands. The royal seal was unmistakable, and he felt a flutter of curiosity mixed with apprehension. His family had always lived relatively quietly compared to other members of the royal family, and he preferred it that way. At school, he was just James to his friends, not the grandson of the late Queen Elizabeth II or the nephew of King Charles III. "James, darling," Sophie said softly, setting the envelope down on the mahogany table. "Your father and I need to speak with you about something important." Prince Edward, the Earl of Wessex, entered the room just then, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by something more serious. James felt his stomach tighten. Important family conversations usually meant changes, and he had grown comfortable with their quiet, predictable life away from the intense scrutiny that followed his cousins William and Harry. "What's wrong?" James asked, pushing his cereal bowl away. His voice cracked slightly, a reminder that he was still very much a teenager despite his royal lineage. "Nothing's wrong, son," Edward assured him, taking a seat across from his youngest child. "But there are some decisions that need to be made, and they involve you directly." Sophie opened the envelope carefully, revealing the official royal letterhead. "King Charles has been reviewing the titles and roles within the family, especially for the younger generation. With William now the heir and his children in direct line of succession, there's been discussion about how to best support the monarchy going forward." James felt his heart rate increase. He had always known this day might come, but he had hoped it would be much further in the future. "What kind of decisions?" "The king is offering you the opportunity to take on a more formal role within the royal family," Edward explained. "This would include receiving the HRH title and officially becoming a prince, rather than simply being styled as Viscount Severn." The words hung in the air like a challenge. James stared at his parents, trying to process what they were saying. His sister Louise had faced a similar choice when she turned 18, ultimately deciding to maintain her relatively private life while still supporting the family when needed. But James was different, and everyone knew it. "What does that mean exactly?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "It means public duties, official engagements, and a level of scrutiny that you've been largely protected from," Sophie said gently. "But it also means the opportunity to make a real difference, to support causes you care about, and to serve the people in a way that few can." James thought about his current life. He loved his school, Radley College, where he played rugby and studied history with genuine passion. His friends knew about his family, of course, but they treated him normally. He could walk around Windsor or London without attracting attention, something his older cousins had never experienced. "Do I have to decide right now?" he asked. "No," Edward said firmly. "This is too important a decision to rush. But we need to think about your future, James. You're 15 now, and in a few years, you'll need to make choices about university, career, and how you want to contribute to society." Over the next few days, James found himself observing his family and their roles with new eyes. He watched his father at official engagements, seeing the genuine joy Edward found in meeting people and supporting various charities. He noticed how his mother balanced her public duties with being a present parent, managing to maintain their family's relative privacy while still fulfilling her obligations. At school, James struggled to concentrate on his lessons. During history class, while studying the British constitutional monarchy, he found himself thinking about what it really meant to serve. Mr. Thompson, his favorite teacher, noticed his distraction. "Everything all right, James?" the teacher asked after class. James hesitated. He couldn't exactly explain his current dilemma, but Mr. Thompson had always been someone he could trust. "I've been thinking about duty and choice," he said carefully. "How do you know when you should do something because it's expected versus doing what you actually want?" Mr. Thompson leaned against his desk, considering the question seriously. "That's one of the most important questions anyone can ask themselves. I think the key is understanding whether your personal wants align with something meaningful and beneficial to others. Sometimes what we think we want isn't actually what will fulfill us in the long run. That evening, James called his grandmother, the Queen Consort Camilla, seeking advice. She had navigated her own complicated path into royal life and might understand his conflicted feelings. "Darling boy," Camilla said warmly when he explained his situation. "I remember feeling overwhelmed when I realized what marrying your grandfather would mean. But, you know what I learned? The role doesn't define you, you define the role." "But, what if I'm not good at it?" James asked. "What if I disappoint everyone?" "Do you care about people?" Camilla asked. "Yes." "Do you want to make a positive difference in the world?" "Of course." "Then, you'll be fine. The rest can be learned. Your father struggled with shyness when he was younger, and look at him now. Your Uncle Charles worried constantly about whether he was worthy of the crown. These feelings are normal, James. They show you take the responsibility seriously." James spent the weekend at Windsor Castle with his grandfather, King Charles, who wanted to speak with him personally about the opportunity. They walked through the grounds where James had played as a child, past the places where he had learned to ride horses and where his late great-grandmother had taught him about the history of their family. "I don't want to pressure you, James," Charles said as they sat by the long walk. "But I do want you to understand what this means for our family and for the country." "Tell me," James said simply. "The monarchy survives by adapting and by having people who genuinely care about service. Your generation will face challenges we can't even imagine yet: climate change, technological disruption, social changes that will reshape society. We need young people who can connect with others their age and help guide the country through these changes." James thought about his friends at school, their concerns about the future, their passion for environmental issues and social justice. He realized that many of the things his generation cared about were exactly the areas where the royal family could make a difference. "What would my role actually involve?" he asked. "That would largely be up to you, within certain parameters," Charles explained. "We would expect you to complete your education first, university, perhaps some time in the military if that interests you. But, then, you could focus on causes that matter to you. Your aunt focused on international development and equestrian sports. Your father champions the arts and young people's opportunities. You would find your own path." That night, James lay in his bed at Windsor Castle, staring at the ceiling and thinking about his future. Through his window, he could see the lights of London in the distance, representing millions of people who might one day look to him for leadership and inspiration. He thought about his great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, and the way she had dedicated her entire life to service. He remembered the stories his father told about her sense of duty, her unwavering commitment to her role, and the quiet satisfaction she found in making a difference in people's lives. The next morning, James woke with a strange sense of clarity. He found his grandfather in the breakfast room, reading the morning papers as he had done every day for decades. "Grandpapa," James said, taking his seat beside him. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday." Charles looked up from his newspaper, giving James his full attention. "I'm scared," James admitted. "I'm scared of losing my privacy, of making mistakes, of not being good enough. But I'm also excited about the possibility of really making a difference." "Those are exactly the right feelings to have," Charles said warmly. "I don't think I'm ready to decide yet," James continued. "But I want to learn more. Can I start attending some events with you and Dad? Not officially, just to observe and understand what the role really involves?" "Of course," Charles said. "That's a very mature approach." Over the following months, James began accompanying his father and grandfather to various royal engagements. He watched Edward open a new youth center in Birmingham, seeing how the Earl connected with young people who faced challenges James had never experienced. He observed Charles at environmental summits, witnessing the King's genuine passion for conservation and sustainable development. At a visit to a children's hospital in London, James found himself naturally gravitating toward the young patients, talking with them about their favorite video games and school subjects. One 10-year-old boy, confined to a wheelchair after an accident, told James about his dream of becoming an engineer. "You know," James said to the boy, "I've always been interested in how things are built. Maybe when you're older, you can show me some of your designs." The boy's face lit up with joy, and James realized that this simple interaction had probably made the child's day significantly better. It was a small thing, but it mattered. After the hospital visit, Edward pulled James aside. "You were natural in there," he observed. "The children responded to you because you were genuinely interested in them, not just going through the motions." James nodded, still thinking about the young engineer. "It felt good," he admitted. "Like I was actually useful for once." "That feeling," Edward said, "is what makes this role worthwhile. All the protocol, the formality, the public attention, it's all worth it for moments like that." As James's 16th birthday approached, he found himself thinking more seriously about his future. The decision about accepting the HRH title still loomed, but he was beginning to understand what it might mean, both the challenges and the opportunities. His sister Louise came home from university for his birthday celebration, and they talked late into the night about their unique position in the world. "I don't regret my choice to stay relatively private," Louise told him. "But I also sometimes wonder what I might have accomplished with a more public platform." "You're different from me, James. You have a natural ability to connect with people that I've always envied." "But what about having a normal life?" James asked. "Define normal," Louise challenged him. "Is it normal to have the opportunity to meet world leaders, to champion causes you believe in, to potentially influence positive change on a global scale? Our definition of normal is probably very different from most people's." The night before his birthday, James sat in his room at Bagshot Park, surrounded by birthday cards from friends and family. One card, from his late great-grandmother's former private secretary, contained a handwritten note that particularly struck him. "Your great-grandmother once told me that the secret to royal service was remembering that it's not about you, it's about what you can do for others. She said the title and the privilege were tools, not rewards. I believe you have the character to use those tools wisely. Whatever you decide, make sure it's a decision you can live with for the rest of your life." As he fell asleep that night, James thought about the 10-year-old boy in the wheelchair who dreamed of becoming an engineer. He thought about the environmental challenges his generation would face. He thought about the responsibility and the opportunity that came with his unique position. Tomorrow would bring his 16th birthday, and, with it, another conversation with his parents about his future. But, for the first time since receiving that formal envelope months ago, James felt like he was beginning to understand what his answer might be. James's 16th birthday dawned crisp and clear, with frost covering the grounds of Bagshot Park like a delicate silver blanket. He woke early, not from excitement about his birthday, but from the restless energy that had been building in him for weeks. Today would be the day he gave his family an answer about the HRH title and his future role in the royal family. The birthday breakfast was kept deliberately small, just his immediate family and his grandparents, King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla. Despite the intimate setting, James could feel the weight of expectation in the room. Everyone was trying to act normal, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation that made the conversation feel slightly forced. "So, any special plans for today besides the usual birthday traditions?" his sister Louise asked, buttering her toast with perhaps more concentration than necessary. "Actually, yes," James said, surprising everyone. "I'd like to make an announcement." The room fell quiet except for the gentle clink of china and the distant sound of gardeners working outside. Charles set down his coffee cup, giving James his complete attention. "I've been thinking about everything we've discussed over the past few months," James began, his voice steadier than he felt. "The opportunities, the responsibilities, what it would mean for my future and for the family." Sophie reached over and squeezed Edward's hand under the table, both parents trying to remain neutral despite their own hopes and concerns. "I've decided that I want to accept the HRH title and the role of prince," James continued, "but with some conditions." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" "I want to finish my education at Radley first, without any official royal duties that would interfere with my studies. I want to go to university and have as normal a student experience as possible. And I want to work with you to define what my royal role will actually look like, focusing on areas where I can genuinely make a difference rather than just following a traditional path. The relief on his parents' faces was palpable, but James held up a hand to indicate he wasn't finished. But I also want everyone to understand that this decision scares me, he admitted. I'm not doing this because I feel obligated or because it's expected. I'm doing it because I've realized that I care more about the potential to help people than I do about maintaining my privacy. Camilla smiled warmly. That's exactly the right reason to make this choice, darling. When would the formal announcement be made? James asked. We can discuss the timing, Charles said. Perhaps after your A-levels, when you're closer to beginning your adult role. That would give you nearly 2 years to prepare and to continue observing royal duties without pressure. Over the following weeks, the secret of James's decision was carefully guarded within the immediate family while plans began to take shape behind the scenes. James continued his studies at Radley, but he also began working with private tutors on constitutional history, public speaking, and the intricacies of royal protocol. The transformation was gradual but noticeable. James found himself paying closer attention during his father's public engagements, asking more detailed questions about the reasoning behind certain approaches. He began reading more widely about social issues, environmental challenges, and international relations. His rugby coach, Mr. Davies, noticed changes in James's leadership style on the field. You're playing with more confidence lately, Severn, he commented after a particularly strong practice. Good to see you taking charge when the team needs direction. James smiled, realizing that the skills he was developing for his future royal role were already affecting other areas of his life. Leadership, he was learning, wasn't just about having authority, it was about understanding how to bring out the best in others and work toward common goals. At Christmas, the family gathered at Sandringham for their traditional celebration. For James, this holiday felt different from previous years. Instead of simply enjoying the festivities as a grandson and nephew, he found himself observing the careful choreography of royal holiday traditions, understanding for the first time how much thought and planning went into maintaining the balance between family time and public duty. On Christmas morning, after the traditional church service and gift exchange, Charles asked James to join him for a private walk around the estate. The winter landscape was beautiful but stark, reflecting the serious nature of their conversation. Your grandmother and I have been discussing the announcement of your new title, Charles said as they walked past the frozen lake. We want to make sure you're completely comfortable with the timing and the way it's handled. What are you thinking? James asked. We could make the announcement on your 18th birthday, which would be traditional and appropriate. But, if you prefer, we could wait until you finish university, or even until you've completed some form of national service if that's a path you choose to pursue. James considered this carefully. I think my 18th birthday makes sense. It would give me time to mature into the role gradually, and it aligns with when I'll legally become an adult. There's something else we need to discuss, Charles continued, his tone becoming more serious. Once the announcement is made, your life will change dramatically. The media attention, the security requirements, the public expectations, they're all significant. James had been thinking about this aspect of his decision constantly. I know. I've been watching what happened with William and Harry when they were younger, and how they handled the pressure differently. What have you learned from their experiences? That it's important to stay connected to who you are underneath the title, James said thoughtfully. Harry lost himself for a while because he couldn't reconcile his private identity with his public role. William succeeded because he found ways to be authentic while still fulfilling his duties. Very perceptive, Charles said approvingly. The key is finding the right balance between accessibility and maintaining appropriate boundaries. As spring arrived, James began accompanying his father on more public engagements, though still as an observer rather than a participant. During a visit to a technology college in Manchester, James met young people his own age who were studying engineering, computer science, and renewable energy technologies. This is what I want to focus on, he told his father during the drive home. Young people and innovation, especially around environmental solutions. My generation is going to inherit the consequences of climate change, but we're also the ones who might solve it. Edward smiled.
That sounds like the beginning of your royal focus area. Is it too narrow?
James asked, suddenly, worried that his interests might be too specific for a royal role.
Not at all.
Your great-grandmother was passionate about horses and dog breeding, and she built an entire program around equestrian sports and animal welfare. Your authentic interests are what will make your role meaningful, both to you and to the people you'll serve. That summer, before his final year at Radley, James spent several weeks shadowing different members of the royal family to better understand the variety of roles within the modern monarchy. He spent time with Princess Anne, learning about her work with international development organizations. He accompanied William to environmental conferences and community outreach programs. The experience that affected him most deeply was a week spent with a youth charity in East London. James worked alongside teenagers from backgrounds vastly different from his own, helping to renovate a community center that provided after-school programs and mentorship opportunities. "You're not what I expected," said Marcus, a 17-year-old from Hackney who had initially been skeptical about working with someone from the royal family.
"What did you expect?" James asked as they painted walls together. "Someone stuck up, I guess. Someone who couldn't relate to normal people's problems."
James paused in his painting.
"You know, I worry about that sometimes. About being so removed from real life that I become useless to people who need help." Marcus looked surprised by his honesty. "Maybe that's why you won't be useless," he said. "Because you actually worry about it."
That evening, James called his mother from his hotel room, emotional after the day's work. "Mom, I met this kid today who reminded me why I made this decision," he said.
"Tell me about him."
"His name is Marcus, and he's brilliant. He wants to study engineering, just like that boy I met in the hospital last year. But Marcus doesn't think he'll be able to afford university, and he doesn't believe that people like me actually care about people like him."
"And how did you respond to that?" Sophie asked gently. "I told him I wanted to prove him wrong.
And I meant it, Mom.
I really meant it."
"Then, you're ready," Sophie said simply. As James entered his final year at Radley, he began working with the palace communications team to prepare for the eventual announcement of his new title. The process was more complex than he had anticipated, involving legal procedures, parliamentary notifications, and careful coordination with other Commonwealth countries.
"The announcement will be significant because it represents the King's confidence in the younger generation of royals," explained Sarah Mitchell, the palace's deputy communications director. "But we want to present it in a way that emphasizes your commitment to service rather than just the ceremony and tradition." James appreciated this approach. He had no interest in pomp for its own sake, but he understood that ceremony and tradition served important purposes in maintaining the monarchy's connection to history and national identity. His final year at school flew by in a blur of A-level preparations, university applications, and continued royal education. James had decided to apply to several universities, ultimately choosing to study natural sciences at Cambridge with a focus on environmental science and sustainable technology. "It's perfect," his father commented when James shared his university plans. "It combines your personal interests with areas where you can make a real contribution as a working royal." As his 18th birthday approached, James felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety that kept him awake at night. The boy who had once worried about losing his privacy and normal life had grown into a young man who understood that his unique position came with both extraordinary opportunities and significant responsibilities. The week before his birthday, James received a letter that would stay with him for years to come. It was from Marcus, the teenager he had worked with in East London. "James," the letter read, "I wanted you to know that I got accepted to Imperial College to study engineering. My teacher said the recommendation letter from your father's charity program made a big difference. I know you're going to become a prince soon, and I know you're going to be good at it because you care about people like me. Don't let anyone tell you that you're too young or too inexperienced. Some of us are counting on you to be different from the way things have always been done. Happy birthday, and good luck." James read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and placing it in his desk drawer. It would serve as a reminder of why he had chosen this path and what he hoped to accomplish. 2 days before his 18th birthday, James had one final conversation with his grandfather about the announcement and what would come after it. "Are you ready for this, James?" Charles asked as they sat in his study at Clarence House, surrounded by books, papers, and the accumulated weight of royal history. "I don't think anyone can be completely ready for something like this," James replied honestly. "But I'm committed to learning and to doing my best." "That's all any of us can do," Charles said warmly. "Your great-grandmother used to say that the crown doesn't make you special, your service to others does. Remember that, and you'll find your way." The night before his 18th birthday, James couldn't sleep. He stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the dark gardens of Bagshot Park, thinking about how different his life would be after tomorrow. By this time next year, he would be known as His Royal Highness Prince James, and the quiet boy who had once just wanted to blend in at school would be a public figure with responsibilities to millions of people. But, instead of feeling overwhelmed, James felt something he hadn't expected: peace. He had made his choice with careful consideration and genuine motivation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them knowing that he was following a path that aligned with his values and his desire to make a meaningful contribution to the world. Tomorrow would bring his 18th birthday, the formal announcement of his new title, and the beginning of his adult life as a working member of the royal family. Tonight, for the last time, he was simply James, Viscount Severn, on the verge of becoming someone entirely new while remaining fundamentally himself. The morning of James's 18th birthday arrived with unprecedented media attention. News vans lined the roads leading to Bagshot Park, and helicopters circled overhead, all waiting for the official announcement that would transform the quiet teenager into His Royal Highness Prince James. The boy who had once moved through the world relatively unnoticed was about to step into the blazing spotlight of modern royalty. James woke before his alarm, his stomach churning with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Today would mark the end of his childhood and the beginning of his life of public service. He dressed carefully in a navy suit that had been specially tailored for the occasion, knowing that every detail of his appearance would be scrutinized and analyzed by millions of people around the world. At breakfast, the family gathered one last time as they had always been, without the formal protocols that would soon govern many of their interactions. Louise had returned from university for the occasion, and she could see the tension in her younger brother's shoulders. "You know," she said quietly as they sat together, "when I was deciding whether to take on more royal duties, I realized something important. The title doesn't change who you are inside. It just gives you new tools to express who you've always been." "What if I disappoint people?" James asked, voicing the fear that had been haunting him for weeks. "You will," Louise said matter-of-factly. "Not because you're inadequate, but because you're human. Great-grandmother disappointed people sometimes too. The difference between a good royal and a great one is how you handle the disappointments and learn from them." At precisely 10 o'clock, the family gathered in the drawing room at Bagshot Park for the private ceremony that would officially grant James his new title. King Charles had traveled from Windsor Castle for the occasion, bringing with him the formal documents that would change his grandson's legal status and position in the line of succession. "James Alexander Edward," Charles said formally, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of tradition, "by the grace of God and the authority vested in me as your sovereign, I hereby grant you the style and title of His Royal Highness Prince James of Wessex." The words seemed to echo in the quiet room, and James felt something shift inside him, not dramatically, but subtly. He was still the same person who had eaten breakfast with his family an hour ago, but he was also now something more. The responsibility felt both heavier and more natural than he had expected. "Congratulations, Your Royal Highness," Edward said formally, then broke into a proud smile and embraced his son. "I'm so proud of you, James." The family had a few minutes to celebrate privately before the communications team arrived to coordinate the public announcement. James used this time to step outside into the garden, needing a moment of quiet before his life changed forever. His phone buzzed with a text from his best friend at Radley, saw the news vans on TV. "Today's the day, isn't it? Know you'll be brilliant, mate. Don't forget us regular people when you're saving the world." The message made James smile and reminded him of why he had made this choice. It wasn't about the ceremony or the titles, it was about the work he could do and the people he could help. At noon, the palace released the official statement:
the King is pleased to announce that on the occasion of his 18th birthday, His Royal Highness Prince James of Wessex will begin taking on official royal duties in support of His Majesty's work. Prince James has expressed particular interest in working with young people on environmental and technological innovation. Within minutes, the story was trending on social media, and news outlets around the world began broadcasting special reports about the newest working member of the British royal family. James watched some of the coverage from his father's study, fascinated and somewhat overwhelmed by the intense interest in his life. "It feels surreal," he told his mother as they watched a BBC report that included childhood photos he didn't even remember posing for. "It will for a while," Sophie assured him. "But, eventually, you'll find your rhythm. The key is to remember that behind all the noise and attention, there are real people whose lives you can genuinely improve." That evening, the family hosted a small private dinner to celebrate James's birthday and new role. The guest list was carefully chosen: close family members, a few longtime family friends, and representatives from the charities that James would soon begin supporting. During dinner, James found himself in conversation with Dr. Sarah Chen, who ran a youth environmental program that he had visited several months earlier. "I have to admit," she said, "when I heard you might become involved with our work, I was skeptical. We get a lot of well-meaning supporters who visit once and then disappear." "What changed your mind?" James asked. "The questions you asked during your visit. They weren't the usual polite inquiries about our programs. You wanted to understand the science behind what we're doing, the barriers we face, and how policy changes could actually help. You did your homework." "I'm still learning," James said honestly. "There's so much I don't know." "That's exactly why I think you'll be effective," Dr. Chen replied. "The people who think they know everything are usually the least helpful." As the evening wound down, James stepped onto the terrace with his grandfather. The media vans had finally departed, leaving the grounds peaceful under the starlit sky. "How are you feeling?" Charles asked. "Overwhelmed, excited, terrified, and determined," James answered honestly. "Sometimes all at once." "That sounds exactly right," Charles said with a chuckle. "I felt the same way when I became Prince of Wales, and I was much older than you are now." "Do you have any advice for tomorrow and the days after that?" Charles considered the question carefully. "Remember that this role is ultimately about service, but it's also about authenticity. People will forgive mistakes and inexperience, but they won't forgive insincerity. Be yourself, James, but be the best version of yourself." The next morning brought James's first official royal engagement as Prince James. He would be visiting a youth technology center in London, meeting with young entrepreneurs and innovators who were working on environmental solutions. The irony wasn't lost on him. His first official duty involved exactly the kind of people and work that had inspired him to accept his new role. The journey to London felt different this time. Instead of traveling quietly with his father, James rode in his own official car, accompanied by his new private secretary, Margaret Hartwell, who had previously worked with Princess Anne. The security detail was larger, and James noticed how people on the street stopped and stared as the motorcade passed. "Nervous?" Margaret asked as they approached the technology center. "Yes," James admitted. "But good nervous, I think." "The key to your first few engagements is to listen more than you speak," Margaret advised. "People want to share their work and their passion with you. Your job is to show genuine interest and ask thoughtful questions." The technology center was bustling with activity when James arrived. Young people barely older than himself were working on projects ranging from renewable energy storage to urban farming solutions. As he walked through the facility, James found himself genuinely fascinated by the innovation and creativity on display. "Your Royal Highness," said Emma Rodriguez, a 20-year-old who was developing a new type of solar panel coating. "I understand you're studying environmental science?" "I will be, starting at Cambridge this autumn," James replied. "Your project looks incredible. Can you explain how the coating improves efficiency?" For the next 10 minutes, Emma enthusiastically explained her research, clearly delighted to have someone asking detailed technical questions rather than just admiring her work politely. James found himself completely absorbed in the conversation, momentarily forgetting about the cameras and reporters documenting his every move. "You know," Emma said as their conversation wrapped up, "it's refreshing to meet someone from your family who actually understands the science behind this stuff." As James moved through the center, he began to relax into his new role. The young innovators he met were passionate, brilliant, and eager to share their work. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and James realized that his genuine interest in their projects was just as valuable as any financial support he might help them secure. During a break between meetings, James stepped into a quiet corridor with Margaret to review the rest of his schedule. "How do you think it's going?" he asked. "Very well," Margaret said approvingly. "You're asking the right questions and showing genuine curiosity. That's exactly what these young people need to feel supported and validated. I keep worrying that I'm not doing enough, though. Just talking to them doesn't seem like enough to justify all this attention and resources." "James," Margaret said gently, "you're 18 years old and this is your first official engagement. You're not expected to solve climate change by tea time. What you're doing today is building relationships and showing support. That matters more than you might realize." The final part of James's visit involved a roundtable discussion with a dozen young environmental entrepreneurs. As he listened to their presentations and challenges, he found himself thinking not just as a royal patron, but as a peer who would soon be starting university himself. "The biggest problem we face," said David Kim, who was working on sustainable packaging solutions, "isn't technical. It's getting taken seriously by established businesses and investors. They see our age and assume we don't know what we're talking about." "What would help change that perception?" James asked. "Visibility," said another participant. "When young innovators get support from respected institutions or high-profile advocates, it legitimizes our work in the eyes of traditional power structures." James nodded, beginning to understand how his role could genuinely help these young entrepreneurs beyond just ceremonial support. As the engagement concluded, James felt a sense of satisfaction he hadn't expected. The work had felt natural and meaningful, more like an extension of his personal interests than a formal duty. On the drive back to Bagshot Park, Margaret reviewed the media coverage that was already beginning to appear online. "The initial responses are very positive," she reported. "People are commenting on how engaged you seemed and how well you connected with the participants." "Good," James said, then paused. "That sounds terrible, doesn't it? Being pleased about good coverage?" "Not at all," Margaret assured him. "Positive coverage means your message is getting across effectively. And, in your case, the message is that you genuinely care about the work these young people are doing. That's exactly what we want people to understand about your role." That evening, James received several messages from participants at the Technology Center. Emma had sent a photo of herself with him, along with the message, "Thanks for actually listening today. It meant more than you know." David Kim had written, "Your Royal Highness, your questions about market barriers for young entrepreneurs were spot on. If you're ever serious about digging deeper into these issues, I'd love to continue the conversation." Reading these messages, James felt something click into place. This was what his role could be, not just ceremonial appearances, but genuine engagement with issues and people he cared about. The title and the platform were tools he could use to amplify important work and connect innovative people with the resources they needed. As he prepared for bed that night, James reflected on the day's events. His first official engagement as Prince James had exceeded his expectations in every way. He had felt useful, engaged, and genuinely helpful to people doing important work. His phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this one from Marcus, the young man he had worked with in East London. "Saw you on the news today, Your Royal Highness. You looked like you belonged there. Keep being different from what people expect." James smiled as he turned off his phone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but today had shown him that he had made the right choice. He was no longer just James, Viscount Severn, trying to figure out his place in the world. He was Prince James, with work to do and people to serve. The transformation was complete, but, in many ways, his real journey was just beginning. 6 months after his transformation into Prince James, the young royal found himself standing in the rain outside a flood-damaged community centre in Yorkshire, surrounded by volunteers who had been working tirelessly to help their neighbours recover from the worst flooding in the region's history. This wasn't a scheduled royal visit. James had seen the news coverage and asked his private secretary to arrange an immediate trip to offer support. The rain soaked through his waterproof jacket as he helped carry supplies into the temporary shelter that had been set up in the local school gymnasium. An elderly woman named Mrs. Fletcher approached him, not recognizing him at first in his casual work clothes and muddy boots. "Thank you for helping, love," she said warmly. "We can use all the hands we can get." "Of course," James replied, continuing to unload boxes of food and clothing from the delivery truck. "How long has the flooding been this bad?" 3 weeks now," Mrs. Fletcher sighed. "Lost everything in my house, I did. 60 years of memories, gone in one night." It wasn't until another volunteer called out "Your Royal Highness" that Mrs. Fletcher realized who she had been talking to. Her face flushed with embarrassment, but James quickly put her at ease. "Please, just call me James," he said gently. "And I'm sorry about your house. That must be devastating." "It is," she admitted. "But, you know what? Having young people like you come and actually help instead of just posing for photos, that gives us hope." As James worked alongside the volunteers throughout the day, he listened to story after story of loss, resilience, and community spirit. The flooding had destroyed hundreds of homes, but it had also brought people together in ways that reminded him why he had chosen this path of service. Later that evening, as he sat in the local pub that had been turned into an informal coordination center for relief efforts, James found himself in deep conversation with Tom Harrison, a local councillor who had been leading the response efforts. "The thing is, Your Royal Highness," Tom said, "we get promises from politicians every time there's a disaster like this. They come, they make speeches, they promise funding, and then they disappear until the next election. But this flooding is happening more often because of climate change, and we need long-term solutions, not just emergency responses." "What kind of solutions?" James asked, pulling out his notebook, a habit he had developed during his royal engagements. "Better flood defenses, yes, but also sustainable development practices, better warning systems, and support for communities to become more resilient. It's exactly the kind of environmental work you've been talking about, but applied to real communities facing real problems." James spent another hour listening to Tom's detailed explanation of the challenges the region faced, taking notes and asking questions that demonstrated his genuine understanding of the issues. By the time he returned to London the next day, he had the framework for what would become his signature initiative as a working royal. 2 weeks later, James was back in Yorkshire, this time for a formal engagement to launch the Resilient Communities Programme, an initiative that would combine royal patronage with practical support for communities facing environmental challenges. The program would connect young innovators with local communities, providing funding and technical expertise to develop location-specific solutions to climate-related problems. "This isn't about charity," James explained to the gathered crowd of local officials, community leaders, and media representatives. "This is about partnership. The young entrepreneurs I've met have incredible ideas, but they need real-world testing environments. Communities like yours have deep local knowledge and urgent needs, but you need access to cutting-edge solutions. Bringing these groups together creates benefits for everyone." The speech was well received, but James knew that the real test would be whether the program actually delivered results. He had insisted on measurable outcomes and regular progress reports, determined that his royal platform would be used for genuine impact rather than just positive publicity. As autumn arrived and James prepared to start his studies at Cambridge, he reflected on how much his life had changed in the months since accepting his royal title. The constant media attention had been challenging to adjust to. Every outfit choice was analyzed, every expression photographed, every public statement scrutinized for deeper meaning. But the work had been more fulfilling than he had ever imagined. In addition to the Resilient Communities program, he had become patron of 3 youth organizations focused on environmental innovation, had spoken at 2 international conferences on climate change and technology, and had helped secure funding for a dozen young entrepreneurs whose work aligned with his interests. His university preparations had been unlike those of any other freshman. In addition to the usual academic preparations, James had worked with security services to arrange protection that would be unobtrusive enough to allow him to have something approaching a normal student experience. He had also spent hours with media advisors, learning how to balance his royal duties with his desire to be treated like any other student. The night before leaving for Cambridge, James had dinner with his family at Bagshot Park. The conversation was relaxed and normal, focusing on practical concerns about laundry, study schedules, and keeping his dormitory room reasonably tidy.
"Are you nervous about university?" Louise asked as they lingered over dessert.
About the academic work, no, James replied honestly. About trying to balance being a student with being a working royal, definitely.
"You'll find your rhythm," Edward assured him.
"And, remember, your education is just as important as your royal duties.
Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." "What if the other students treat me differently?" James asked.
"Some will," Sophie said practically.
"But most university students have their own concerns and interests. If you're genuine and approachable, you'll find your people."
The next morning, James arrived at St. John's College, Cambridge, with significantly more luggage than the typical freshman, security equipment, formal wear for official functions, and enough casual clothes to last him through a term where he might not be able to go home as often as he'd like.
His assigned roommate was Oliver Chen, a mathematics student from Hong Kong who greeted James with friendly pragmatism that immediately put him at ease.
"So," Oliver said as they arranged their books on shared shelves, "should I call you Your Royal Highness or just James?"
"Definitely just James," James replied gratefully.
"I was hoping university could be as normal as possible."
"Fair enough.
I'll try to remember that when you're on the front page of the tabloids for burning your toast or failing to do your laundry properly."
James laughed, appreciating Oliver's straightforward approach.
"Please tell me you'll warn me if I'm about to do something embarrassing that will end up in the newspapers."
"Deal," Oliver agreed.
"But, in return, you have to help me understand why British people are so obsessed with queuing properly."
Over the following weeks, James settled into university life with surprising ease.
His fellow students were initially curious about having a prince in their classes, but the novelty wore off quickly as everyone became absorbed in their studies. James found that his royal experiences had actually prepared him well for academic work. He had learned to ask good questions, to listen carefully to different perspectives, and to think about complex problems from multiple angles. His natural sciences courses were exactly as challenging and fascinating as he had hoped. Professor Williams, who taught his environmental science seminar, was particularly impressed with the practical examples James brought to class discussions. "When we talk about community resilience in the face of climate change," Professor Williams said during one session, "James often has actual experience working with communities that are dealing with these challenges.
It enriches our theoretical discussions considerably."
But balancing student life with royal duties proved more complex than James had anticipated. He might spend Tuesday morning in a lecture on atmospheric chemistry, then drive to London for an evening reception supporting young entrepreneurs, then return to Cambridge late at night to complete an assignment that was due Wednesday morning. "You look exhausted," Oliver observed one Thursday evening as James returned from a royal engagement in Scotland. "I am," James admitted, slumping into his desk chair. "I love both parts of my life, but combining them is harder than I expected." "Maybe you need to be more selective about which royal things you say yes to," Oliver suggested.
"You're 18, not 48. You don't have to accept every invitation."
This conversation led James to have a serious discussion with his private secretary about prioritizing his commitments. They developed a system where James would focus on engagements directly related to his areas of interest, declining invitations that felt more ceremonial than substantive. The new approach worked well, allowing James to excel in his studies while still maintaining a meaningful program of royal activities. By his second term, he had found a rhythm that felt sustainable and fulfilling. One particularly memorable engagement took place in March, when James visited a secondary school in Manchester where students had developed an innovative water purification system that could help communities affected by flooding. The visit was arranged through his Resilient Communities program, connecting the students' work with communities that could benefit from their innovation. Your Royal Highness, said Sarah Patterson, a 17-year-old who had led the project development, we've been following your work with young inventors. It's inspiring to see someone our age taking these issues seriously at such a high level. Please, call me James, he replied, studying the water purification prototype. And, this work is incredible. Have you thought about scaling it up for larger communities? That's our dream, said another student, Michael Torres. But, we don't know how to connect with the communities that might need it, or how to get the resources to produce it in larger quantities. That's exactly the kind of connection the Resilient Communities program is designed to make, James explained. I know several communities in flood-prone areas that would be thrilled to test your system. Would you be interested in presenting your work to them? 3 months later, James watched with pride as Sarah and Michael presented their water purification system to community leaders in Yorkshire, the same region where he had helped with flood relief nearly a year earlier. The students were nervous but excited, and the community leaders were impressed both by the innovation and by the practical benefits it could provide. Tom Harrison, the local councillor who had first explained the need for long-term solutions to flooding problems, approached James after the presentation. This is exactly what we needed, Tom said enthusiastically. Not just emergency response, but practical innovation that helps us become more self-sufficient and resilient. The students did all the hard work, James replied. I just helped make the introduction. That's what leadership is, though, isn't it? Tom observed. Seeing connections that others miss and helping good people find each other. As his first year at university came to an end, James reflected on how much had changed since that morning when his mother had walked into the breakfast room with a formal envelope bearing the royal seal. The frightened 15-year-old who had worried about losing his privacy and normal life had evolved into a confident young man who understood how to use his unique position to create genuine positive impact. His grades were excellent, his royal work was producing measurable results, and he had formed friendships at university that felt authentic and lasting. Oliver had become not just a roommate but a trusted friend who offered honest advice about everything from academic challenges to media strategy. You know, Oliver said as they packed up their belongings at the end of term, when I first found out I'd be rooming with a prince, I thought it would be weird and complicated. And? James asked, carefully packing the photographs from his royal engagements alongside his textbooks and football trophies. It was weird and complicated, Oliver said with a grin. But, in good ways. You've shown me that being royal doesn't have to mean being out of touch with real life. And, I hope I've helped you remember what it's like to be a normal university student. You have, James assured him. More than you know. As James drove away from Cambridge that day, heading home to Bagshot Park for the summer holidays, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction and anticipation for what lay ahead. His transformation from reluctant Viscount to working prince was complete, but his real work was just beginning. The summer would bring new challenges and opportunities, including a major international conference on youth and environmental innovation where he would deliver his first keynote address as a royal patron. But James felt ready for whatever came next, confident in his purpose and grateful for the path that had led him to this moment. He was no longer the boy who had worried about disappointing people or failing to live up to expectations. He was Prince James, using his platform to amplify important work and connect innovative solutions with real-world needs. And, most importantly, he was exactly who he wanted to be.